Welcome to the Thoughtful Software Podcast. My name is Fahad Chokat, and joining me always is Andrew Wolf, CEO of Skiplist. This podcast is about building great software, thoughtful software. And in this episode, we discuss master data management. The most often cited reason for implementing a master data management system is really to reduce dirty data in the organization. Cleaning data is a difficult, repetitive, and cumbersome process. Plus, data can also live in different silos, such as a CRM, accounting system, HR, payroll. There could be hundreds of different data sources. And so, who holds the truth? And so, these projects also often fail for a number of reasons. Complexity, politics, lack of domain expertise. So today we get a chance to speak with Cort Fritz, a master data specialist with a number of years of experience in this field. He's always fun to talk to. We get into what is master data, why is it important, what is a good starting point, what to do with old systems. We touch on APIs, and if there ever needs to be intelligence in a master data system. You'll want to listen to this episode because for master data management, it's a really huge IT spend. I'm sure you'll enjoy this conversation with Cort Fritz. So here we go. Since you guys are like the master data geniuses and gurus, I guess, uh, I'm going to let you guys talk. But I think the first thing that would be really interesting, because what we try to do is start from like a good foundation and then go off into different tangents, is maybe Andrew, you can start off in describing what is master data and why it's important. And then Cort would love to hear your feedback as well, or your opinion as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So master data ultimately can boil down to almost a sentence, which is all the entities that a business deals with on a daily basis. So if you're an accounting firm, you have accounts, the people you do accounting for, you have reporting agencies, you have different forms. These can be considered master data depending on how you want to master them. And these are going to be different across different entities, different types of business. Ultimately, there are some standard ones. We talk about master data from an accounting level, probably the best example of accounts, invoices, and all of that. That's a traditional model, but I like to think of a bigger level. But Cort, how do you think about it?
You might find this to be an arbitrary distinction because it depends on how you look at master data. It does mean many things to many people. Master data can be the data that's shared, for example, and that's part of my definition for sure. But if it's the entities that you deal with every day, then it sort of could be anything. And so if I'm going to winnow it down, the way I like to think about it is the eternal entities. And so what's an eternal entity? I'm an eternal entity. I exist and I will have existed, and you can't take that out of the universe, right? I'm there. Now, if you really squint at that, you say, well, Cort, you really haven't changed it, right? So anything is eternal. Once it happened, it existed and it's sort of there. And I guess I need a better way to say the first thing, because what I end up saying is I say four things. I say it's an eternal entity, but second thing, it's not business transactions. So I might have accounts, like you said, but I wouldn't have invoices, unlike what you said. I consider those to be transactional data. And so if I had to say it in a very uncourt, simple way, I would say master data is the core entities, and transactional data are the transactions by those core entities. And that's kind of my first rule of thumb. But I have two other things about it. There's a couple other points that I think are interesting, because I think it's a really interesting thing that we just brought up. What is it? We're having trouble defining. We are two dudes that do a lot of master data, and we talk about it two different ways. That's true across the industry. There's two other distinctions that I make that are sort of more aspects about it. So we have eternal entities, but not business transactions. I said those 2 points. The next two are, you build this master data system, you build all these integrations with everything, you might as well make it the one way data gets shared between systems. So I consider data shared between systems not quite master data, but you're just using the same platform for shared facts, and it may be downstream or a system of reference to data held in a transactional system. So like, let's say you have accounts and you want every system to know the net present value of that account, right? Like your call center, when someone calls in and you were to say, how much is this call worth? The transactional history is not master data in my mind, but the sum of that should be shared data, should probably flow through the same one connecting system that you built for everything. So I think any shared data, while not master data, does belong in that system. I think it's silly to build a second way to share data. And the other finding I have, the final finding, anytime you're doing master data, you are doing CRM. Because if there's something core to your business is about transactions, and the core things about those transactions is who you're transacting with, who you're getting supplied from, and that's just a universal truth. And so anytime you're dealing with master data, you're dealing with CRM, or you're right next door to it.
So I think I like to think of master data as a graph, right? And I think when I said that the invoices and things, transactional data is part of master data, I was thinking of a system level, maybe not a data level, but I'm glad you made that distinction. And so you have this graph of entities, we'll call them objects, and the things that they do between each other. And in any space you're in, you have interconnected entities. Like if you're in the car business, you may pretend that you don't need shipping, but sure as hell you need the cars from your factories to get to the dealership. You need that. Like everything can be at that point master data. You'd hear someone say, well, okay, well, I have 100 different entities and they're all semi-permanent or permanent, and I want to understand them all and the interactions between them, which is the purpose of master data, or one purpose of it, the analytics that you get from it. So what would you tell someone that said, well, okay, cool, I have 100 entities and that's a lot. That system's going to be incredibly complex. How do you talk them off the ledge of starting with 5 or 6 or 7?
I think you really shine. I like the way you're talking about it. I think, you have these core entities, these eternal entities, these long-lived entities, whatever, however we want it. We're having trouble describing it, but however we want to. And then you said the things they do between each other. I really liked that. I think master data is definitely the core entities. It's definitely how they relate to each other. Like, do I own this? Do I work for this? Are we on the same team? Those sorts of mappings. But then the things they do with each other are the not master data part. The actions that they do, that's a really clear distinction for me. That belongs in some transactional system. And that's an OLTP system or something like that, not a master data system.
So then why would, Fahad, you asked a question earlier, why would we do master data? And I gave one reason of the analytics. A lot of people don't, and actually salespeople get this right the most. They understand how their domain works, meaning I have to talk to this company, talk to this dude over here, get this paperwork filed, and they understand intrinsically how to move things through the process, quote, which is just how their domain interacts with each other. People, if you're not in sales, if you're in engineering, for example, it's really hard to understand because you're not on the front line filing the paperwork, how things transact together. And the analytics can be incredibly insightful for marketing. One other reason I see people doing it is so that when we're talking about customer A in my CRM system, as Cort pointed out, and my accounting system, they're the same. And so I like to spread the difference between reporting and analytics, also the difference between the 1990s and the 2010s. But having those reports be right, and knowing that when I talk about customer A in system A and I talk about customer A in system B, that they're both talking about the same customer, so that my reports correlate across systems, which gives a different type of insight, a snapshot to people transacting in those systems and using them.
Totally. It's so important to get a 360-degree view. And I think, you're integrating your systems. You have some choices. You can sort of piecemeal integrate this with that, this with that. If you have a strategy of integration, you really start getting increasing returns from building one hub And to build one hub for all your systems, you lead naturally to master data. So it's important because it's necessary. You have, if you don't, a sort of a outgrowth of Metcalfe's law. The number of if you don't do a hub, the number of integrations you have is 2 to the n, where n is the number of systems you have. That gets real expensive really fast. And to get disparate systems to talk to each other, if they don't have the same IDs for the things they talk about, then 2 to the n times a master data project for each one. So you really want to do it once right in a hub, and then connect everything to it. It's important because it's sort of like the physics of software. It's necessary once you have more than a few systems. I think another reason it's really important is sort of a social reason. We'll get into that, I bet, later, because master data kills tech leaders. But being brave and doing master data is a forcing function to get the business to agree on how they talk to each other. I can't tell you how many times I've been inside a business and they say, that's a buyer, that's a supplier. Yeah, but that guy means mil-spec supplier, and this guy means this, and that guy means that. And when you do master data, you find out these entities they're talking about are not the same entity, but they use the same words. And new people are getting hired into the company and doing their very best, getting confused and making mistakes and creating viscosity in the business. So forcing the business to get a shared view of what they're talking about and to train the business to have nuance in their semantics is incredibly powerful. And done right, you can capture the key elements of the nuance. And if you do it perfect, the system flows the nuance and explains it to itself, and you're doing something grand for the business.
The book Domain-Driven Design talks about exactly the thing you mentioned, Cort, which is if we have a shared domain and the language around that domain, we can move very quickly because we're not talking past each other. An account is account, a sheep is a sheep. It's when you have I say account and you're thinking sales account and I'm thinking actual banking account. And now we're not talking at each other. We're talking past each other. It's the same thing with acronyms, right? Elon Musk hates acronyms, got rid of them at Tesla and SpaceX because they cause confusion. And they removed conversation, or well, they add consistency, but they remove clarity from conversations. We should aim for clarity. And the more we can communicate using a shared language, the better off we are and the quicker we'll be able to move as an organization.
Good. Let me ask just a basic question, just for my own understanding is, what's the difference between having a master data as opposed to just having, let's say, a dashboard that rolls up different data sources and you can kind of see, some insights, from different sources. You're not actually connecting them physically, but you're kind of looking at it in a dashboard.
You have no ability to correlate without some form of master data. Now, we've been talking about a fancy form like a hub and stuff like that, but if those disparate systems you're bringing into your dashboard are counting things across different models, their own models, like who are your customers? System A thinks this is the set of customers. System B thinks this is the set of customers. How do you don't even have the same list. How do you draw correlations between those systems? And so a dashboard can pull up reports from different systems, but you might be comparing apples and oranges, per Andrew's point, right? You may be talking about two different things. It's hard to tell. And so master data, it gives you the discipline and the automation to know that when you see something, it is holistically true about the business, and to unblock yourself from being able to correlate A and B.
And even if you can correlate A and B because you put some logic in there, and that's debatably still master data, the correlation doesn't start to apply the business logic, right? When I say a buyer, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a buyer at my organization? What does it mean to be a client of mine, an account of mine? And as you start applying that business logic, that's what makes master data special. Correlation is only one aspect of it, but being able to classify things and say this is surely a buyer because it has these three attributes and that makes you a buyer at my company, that's when you start having magic happen and start seeing data not just correlate, but make sense, right? And being able to make sense of your data, it's critical.
So like we talked about the forcing function of getting people to talk about things the same way. There's a forcing function implied by what Andrew's saying of formalizing the creation of something. What steps do we go through to call someone a customer? Bob keeps signing up people and calling them customers, and then he didn't really qualify it. And then now they're treated poorly, and now our brand is impacted because we can't serve them because they're really not our customers. So how do we, if the business is scaling, get Bob to go through the steps that would qualify a customer? When you have master data, you can create a workflow so that the ID that the whole business uses for that customer doesn't exist unless you've gone for that workflow. You can grab control of that. And that forcing function to create formalization around onboarding customers, buyers, whatever it is that's in the master data, or offboarding them. Like, how do we let something go and make sure we, done all our paperwork and closed it out properly? That's a wonderful secondary effect of master data.
Okay, so we know that we want to have or need some sort of master data architecture in our system. What's the first step that an enterprise or corporation may want to take to maybe build something like this? I'm thinking maybe like understanding how good is the data, the data quality or data profiling. Is that a good first step?
You can do two ways. You can start to understand your domain via the business logic, or you can actually do a data inventory. Now, what I found is data inventories tend to fail if you don't understand the data. And most organizations have a treasure trove of insight that they're not using because they haven't inventoried their data and they really don't know where things are, what systems people are using, or how they're using them. And so really, I would say not starting with the data inventory unless you're sure you understand your data, but rather starting with, well, what does being a buyer mean or whatever, and start really breaking down what things are. So when you do get to the data inventory step, you can classify the data appropriately. Also, limited domain. Don't go after all 100 of the entities that are important to you. Start with 5, start with 6, and then work your way up and earn your complexity. Because if you go too big and you start pulling in too much data, you end up with too much complexity that you can't have, right? So if you, for example, let's say you're using an HRIS system that you need to integrate with, well, that's where your employees are being mastered at, right? You have an HRIS, they're managing your employees. So starting with just one, now you know how to master your employees. You can put them in a database. And now you want to manage your accounts. Well, you have salesforce.com and they're awesome and you have an API. So now you can where the accounts are being mastered. And maybe you have actual account payable, and you want to map those. Well, you have NetSuite, and so then you can grab your data from NetSuite and you can pull that in there. And then you start doing it one system at a time while also looking at your other data, so you don't have to wait and spend a year and a half on a data project that's really cool because you know where everything's at, but now you're still where you were last year.
I think that's so bright that I actually took notes to add it to my approaches folder. I think I want to go meta if it's not annoying to a tech crowd, because I think it's so important. And I think the first step is that recognize that management probably doesn't understand this. And even when you're done, you might not even see the value of it because it's behind the scenes. And they'll come to have expect it. Well, of course, when you materialize something in the HRIS, it shows up in my app over here. They'll forget. And so I think marketing, buy-in, investment, setting expectations, protecting. Master data is really backloaded. You build all this plumbing, you do all this grinding manual work, or I guess brilliant AI work or something. You got to add a lot of intelligence to this data. And it takes a long time, it's hard, and it's never perfect. And it has this expensive plumbing. And it's arcane and annoying. And all those conversations I said you get to force are uncomfortable. And then a year later, it's connecting everything. But you can then maybe, hopefully, still have budget to begin to add some wow factor 360-degree reports of your buyers or manufacturers or whatever. And so it's really backloaded. And so the very first thing I want to do is agree that we're going to spend 40 years on the desert, so like the tribe doesn't kill me, right? Like, and just abandon me. Like I really want to get clear what we're doing, the level of investment, and that is non-trivial. And we should be doing it if it's existential, or if we can really see the future and we're going to have some crazy growth. And if we don't have some way to connect new acquisitions systems in and a strategy to do that, we're going to just fall over on our face. Like that sort of level of thing. It's really crucial. Only do it then, and really get management to understand, oh yeah, wow, I see it, and really get them to understand. That's the first thing I want to do.
The one thing I really like to bring to people's attention is they're billion-dollar companies, global system integrators, Accentures, the Deloittes of the world, the people that integrate your SAP systems with your Salesforce systems, new system implementation. That's mostly what they do. That is 98% of what they do when it comes to software development. And it's staggering to think about the amount of money spent every year on it. And those projects fail all the time. Like they're not successful. They're the same margin of error as every other IT project, which is 68% of projects in the IT fail. It's very interesting when you say that, because I think people look at it like, oh, it's just data. How hard could it be? And then they go to do it and they're in it for 6 months. It's like, holy crap, we're spending a lot of money. This was $6 million.
Yeah.
I thought we'd be done by now. And it's very rarely that simple. And getting that buy-in of this is going to be a slog, working with the right people, of course. I think you can do it. You just have to manage expectations. And you're right, it's never flashy, but I will tell you, every time master data goes down, you'll get a phone call because it's that critical to your business. And so building a robust system around it, and knowing it's worth the time to do that, it's, it's hard to sell, and it's hard to buy too. If you're someone saying, I don't want to wait a year and a half for this, I want it now.
Can you guys elaborate on why this is so complicated? I mean, there's the politics and, buy-in is one part of it. What technically is challenging about this, and why do so many IT projects fail?
Oh my God, it's totally Donner Pass. It's hard. Well, as I said, it's backloaded, and it's really complex, and there's a lot of confusion in the industry. And the solutions that are best of breed, that are sort of you don't get fired for choosing, will get you fired because they aren't good. The patterns are very primitive. Like I would say, Andrew, you and I are working on a master data project that we've invented. Now, maybe we're dumb and we're ignorant. We don't know that the patterns are already out there, but they're not. We've invented so many good patterns that I hope will pay off. But I know for a fact, if I use the best of breed patterns, like make the salespeople choose the one canonical thing when they type it in and block from doing business until they get the master data right, that is the best of breed pattern. That I don't see solutions that make it an async behind the scenes thing and let them move at the speed of business. Nope, don't see that. But we're doing it. Hopefully it'll work. But like those patterns don't exist. And if you implement the best of breed patterns, you will create friction in your business and have people routing around you and creating separate records rather than coalescing them because they have to. And so like you're fighting you're doing a secondary egg-headed librarian activity, and people want to go hunt and kill opportunity. And so you're in tension with the most powerful people in the company with your dumb primitive patterns, because that's state of the art today, with your dumb primitive technology, because people just think about it not very advanced. And so you're really set up to fail. And because of these nuances that we're talking about, you've got to have kind of like a dream team of non-junior, very senior, very able technologists who can talk to the business, and SMEs that can talk to tech, like stakeholders / champions in the business, willing to stick their neck out for a lot of money and a lot of time for a backloaded thing. Like it is very, if you think you're just going to go, well, I'm a good technologist, I've never done it, but I'm going to go do it. Or I'm a good IT guy and, I'm going to get this system. It looks like it's good. Salesforce is telling me blah. I wish you luck. I just wish you luck. It is hard. Now, if your business, is succeeding because, you've discovered how to turn lead into gold and you really can't fail, then it really doesn't matter. You can have some crappy system. People hate it, but they'll be so happy because they're getting so rich, it doesn't matter. But if your business depends on the data and if your business depends on your systems and that's part of your success, it's really hard to get right.
Yeah, I'll add to that. When I was working at another company where we actually built a master data system out, we did it asynchronously behind the scenes. We hooked into Salesforce. So when you create an account in Salesforce, we did all the heavy lifting for people. So we did the transactions automatically, which allowed people to continue to move fast. But I've never seen two people hate each other more than a sales guy who wants to get paid and an accountant that wants his accounts to be set up right in NetSuite. Those two people like just hate each other. Like, dude, just pay me. No, not until you do it right. And if you like, it caused a lot of friction between the account managers, the accountants, and the salespeople to the point where, like, let's just pay the hundreds of thousands of dollars it took to automate it. Well worth it in the end because it tripled the amount we could get through in a quarter, but it's still painful. And to get it, like, it's so critical to get right because you really only get one chance.
Oh my God.
To get
if you
right.
get it wrong, they're going to transfer all their anger onto you, right? Like all the stuff that they're not allowed to simmer at. They can certainly express that to IT.
Yep. And so it's important that you allow people to do their job while allowing the business to get the insights they require. And it takes some really business-minded, as Cort said, senior level people to get it right. But when you get it right, it does transform the way you operate. It gives you unique insights that other companies in your space may not have, which can be invaluable because a lot of, if you're in, let's say self-service IT, that can be very competitive space. There are hundreds of CRMs out there. So if you're Salesforce, just one insight can be the reason you get 10 billion more in sales over other people.
Totally. And I really like what you're saying about the asynchrony and not blocking them, but getting the thing over there. And I'm so sure that you're right, that was secret to your success. I think of master data done right feels like a differential gear between departments that can't think about the things the same way and shouldn't. And we talked earlier about the nuance of data. I call this an account, and you call that an account. They both need to keep calling that an account because you're never going to get them to change their vocabulary. It's not about that. It's like, it's you call it account, you call it account. We call it the right things that they actually are underneath the hood. And then we translate those things with our differential gear code asynchronously behind the scenes so that you impact each other in a way that is in your own language. And it's not always the case. Sometimes you get to unify the business, but a lot of times you're just creating differential gears between disparate groups with disparate interests and disparate ways of thinking. And that's a great way to think about master data.
What about like data or systems that are quite old? What are your thoughts on just, do you create APIs for these old systems? Do you transport them? How do you make that old systems, a lot easier to work with moving forward?
So I've seen this in the current project me and Cort are working on. We've talked about this a lot. There's really three approaches because sometimes you can't shut down an old system too. So keep that in mind. Everyone wants to kill the old, bring in the new, but sometimes the old isn't bad. Sometimes the old is great. It's done its job. It's a workhorse. And is it pretty? No, but that's fine. It doesn't need to be pretty. It's doing its job well. And the first approach is just to dump it and kill it, right? So you dump the data out of the database. You say you can't use it anymore. Here's my new system. It's new, flashy, shiny. It's the Ferrari of systems. That tends not to work very well. I mean, in some organizations, it works because there's enough hierarchy there and training's great and people trust each other. All three of those organizations you can do that in. But for the rest of us mortals, it's very hard to shut off systems. A friend of ours quoted saying that users of old systems have Stockholm syndrome from being abused by the old system, and you need to guide them away from the abuser. That's pretty true. And so you have to be able to make it incremental and shut down the system incrementally. You're listening to them and you're not just taking away the system, taking away to give them something new and shiny, but you're taking away for a good reason, security or what have you, performance, scalability. There's tons of reasons to kill old systems. The other thing is you want to, there's an entire podcast on this, so I'm going to get into system, legacy system conversion, because we could talk for hours on that. I'm sure me and Cort have lots of war stories here to share. the one thing that's super, super important is that you're migrating them to a more optimal system. One of the things I hate seeing is companies can't get master data right, or they can't get the integrations right, or they don't want to pay for it. So they move everyone from a good system. Like I see a company move from NetSuite to a Salesforce.com plugin that does quote accounting, and it's nowhere near as good as NetSuite is. And they forced accounting onto it, so they didn't have to manage the integration. It was cheaper for them, and it was like now everyone doesn't like the system. It causes problems when you go to get employee happiness and system usage are directly correlated.
What are your thoughts about the APIs? Touch on that, like from integrations, creating APIs, synchronizing data. Just your thoughts on that.
I think Andrew, as I said, I completely agree with you about you don't get to choose your battleground, right? There's so much there that's just is what it is. Sometimes you can replace something, sometimes you got to integrate with something. When you integrate, you should protect what you are doing from the legacy. Don't let it get its ick on you. And I think from an API perspective, Andrew knows I'm rabid about this pattern. I want my system to transact with my system. And then if it has something to say to another system, I want it to put that in a durable journal. And I want an asynchronous worker to go, that's not part of my system. It's sort of an external thing that I can secure differently. That's just out of process. And if it goes down, you won't really notice it from my system. I want that durable journal to record everything that needs to go out, and the asynchronous worker to transact that at the rate that works into the other system. And I want the same pattern coming in. Other systems that need to call into me, they get an API, and all it does from that API is just write to a durable journal, the record's there forever, and an asynchronous worker grovels over that and pulls stuff out, and at the rate that my system wants to handle it, transacts into that system. There's some trade-offs, there's complexity, there's a little more latency, but done right, you are so robust, and you have not made your shiny new perfect ideal system that Andrew was just talking about to take on the failure rate, the grimy gunkiness, the three-legged race of deployment, all these other things of these other systems. So you really, 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 when you're in a heavily legacied environment, to isolate yourself from that, protect it, have the razor wire at the edge of the compound, and really know what's yours and know what's theirs, and not mix the mud and dirt of that old stuff into your beautiful meal that you just made. You just don't want to. It's like when you mix food and poison, it's not food anymore, right? Like you really have to keep these things separate. It's not like a little bit poisoned. It's poisoned food. It's not food. It's just you've made nothing. So I'm really zealous about isolation.
Yeah, and that's just good refactoring, right? Is you isolate what changes, and you don't know how the system's going to change, and you always want to wrap that stuff. One of my favorite projects of all time is Capital One had this old legacy API layer, and they're like, we can't rewrite it. It's too big. There's not enough tests. It's monolithic. We're going to break stuff. And one of the guys was like, what if we just wrap it and we put our code, just a thin API layer proxy in front of it, and then we just rip and we pull things up. And then we validate it. And basically what they did was they rewrote everything into microservices by writing this API layer and then gradually pulling things up into nicer, cleaner, less bamboozling code. And they're now like a modern example of great architecture. They're up there with Netflix when people look at good architectures to follow. And it's because they started small and they piecemealed it, but they were able to continue doing development. The organization, it didn't stop. They did this 3-year slog of a rewrite. 60% of rewrites fail, right? They didn't have to face that. They faced it different. They embraced the power of and, as Cort would say, and really they were able to move fast but not break things, and it was fantastic. It's a great story. I recommend looking at it, and their architects and giving them talks, and it's just so good.
That's so great. I really, really love and am jealous that I didn't make the point myself about creating an architecture that can be incrementalized, so that when your project plan comes out, you're doing these little tiny little efforts that themselves are provable, that work alongside the other stuff. And I love create the facade in front of the existing API that is the exact same thing that just calls the existing API. You've done nothing except you can point day 2, one of those endpoints at something else, and you can carve it away little by little. And even if you're near term from splitting out the implementation of that API between the old and the new is heavyweight, that's just scaffolding, and you'll be able to pull that down. And it ends up like so often that being not that hard to do that coordination and get it right. That is such a good pattern, and the general pattern of incrementalism is just life and death. It's so important.
Yep.
One of the last things we should touch on is, one of the principles we have at Skipless is that you should earn your complexity. And so what do you guys think about like implementing things like machine learning and the intelligence into master data?
I made a joke about that earlier. It was I can be a little bit dry, and I don't know if it came through, but I think, what's great for machine learning, having your dev run some queries and find out some edge cases, and then having human beings look at every single record. I think old school is so powerful right now when it comes to master data. It's state of the art today. And I think you end up like, I would love to be on a project where we had extra budget to, study the 1 million record truth set that was handed to us like a pony, and really allowed to do some great classification on merges. And it can certainly theoretically have its role, but I think 9 times out of 10, the difficulty of these projects doesn't allow for a lot of luxury. I think it's a primitive industry right now, master data. You're on the frontier hewing your own logs and making log cabins. You don't really have a lot of time for the finer aspects of civilization, like machine learning or fancy stuff. I'm sure that day happens rarely, and I'm sure it will come. But for master data, I like to factor it away from that for now and keep it simple, sweetheart.
And I'm going to agree with you on this. The earning your complexity here is starting with fewer models. Find the one system, the one data set you can actually know where it's being mastered at. Use that first. Now you have something, and you can always turn 1 into 2 and 2 into 3, but 0 to 1 is the hardest thing for people to do because they see the complexity, and it is very complex. But don't absorb all your complexity right now. Of course it's hard. You have 30,000 employees, and this is crazy. But like, if you do one thing, well, now you have one thing, and you can build on one thing and make it 2 and 2 into 3 and 3 into 4, and you build momentum. And building momentum allows you to win. And a lot of companies miss that. They think they have to get it right up front. You only have to get part of it right, and then you need to get another part of it right, and then another part of it right. And it's about finding which parts you can get right up front.
I think also you want to, in your setting of expectations and in your project planning, make judicious use of tech debt, and you just get leverage. Credit gives you leverage, and so I was really zealous a moment ago about the async integration pattern. Don't necessarily start with it, right? Set everyone's expectation that we're going to get some stuff up and get some value and let the business get instantly gratified, but don't get so much that you've built a really unstable system that you can't quickly remedy, right? Like don't let the last man in the column get so far behind that you just can't see him anymore, right? Like you've got to be really conscious of where you've made improper decisions, but that earning your complexity of, okay, that's up and working now. Let's in the next sprint, now that the business is just gratified, let's now shore up around the corners before we find our system tipping over because we didn't have the right pattern. And so judicious tech debt's good.
It's interesting you both make that same point. Because if you look at a lot of the management consulting companies and a lot of the money that's being invested in startups is around data and AI. And, I believe that, that's a lot of, nonsense and marketing that's going on. But are you guys saying that it's just not ready yet? Or is it, completely something that, is not ready for a number of years, or it's not going to be possible? What are your thoughts on that?
So there's 2 issues with any kind of data. First is domain expertise. And if you show me any organization that understands every domain, I'll show you a company that doesn't exist, because you operate like Amazon understands e-commerce better than anyone else on the planet. And so they're better than everyone else. They have 50% of the market share, right? But do you think they understand trains as well as the last train company did? No. Do they need to? No. And so if they were looking at a data set that had to do with the train industry, they wouldn't do very well. All right. And so one is domain expertise, and two, with data, it comes down to data patterns. And now data patterns, computers can do very well, right? Because they can look at and pull them out. And we're getting better as we get more computation, as we get better CPUs and more RAM and the cloud and all those wonderful things. Yeah, you're seeing a lot more people that pull patterns out and tell you about them and say, hey, you think these are the same entity? That it can do. But it can't tell you that a buyer is a buyer, because it doesn't understand your business the way a human does.
Yeah.
In the future, will it be able to figure out? But yeah, but that's just supervised learning. You still have to go through and give it enough examples to say, given this, it can statistically extrapolate that this is a buyer and this is an employee, and it's still going to be wrong a lot of the time.
There should be like, yeah, totally. That's absolutely true. There should be like a business course that's sort of like required reading. Like they should put in every MBA course the basics about AI. So I'll give you an example that's just really tragic. AI is exactly as Andrew said. You've got to have a truth set that has to be very large, hundreds of thousands, millions of records. You can do it smaller, but I think that's the exception that proves the rule. And you've got to have the really, you got to know how to what AI is and how to the different methods of training and understand it and know your Python, know your R. That not everyone can do that really well, and know when you've statistically sampled correctly or when you're drawing bad influences. Know how to test it. There's a domain expertise that's not widely possessed out there. That's fine, but like consider this. This is the example I was alluding to. Microsoft, which knows some things about documents, created this product called Delve, and I defy anyone to show me what inferences it's drawing through ML with Delve. I defy anyone. I defy their director, their lead program manager, the most enthusiastic customer that's going to use it for 2 weeks before they give it up. I defy anyone. So they're not stupid people. And they just went out with something that not even understanding what they're trying to solve. And I don't mean to pick on Microsoft. It's endemic. Even experts will mess up getting AI right. It does a tool, it can find patterns, and it can be amazing and shocking when it finds those patterns. But you gotta have the things that Andrew was talking about, and even people that have all of that have billions of documents, literally billions of documents of truth sets, incredible structured data, incredible funding, incredible expertise, can make pointless AI things that draw no value.
Thanks for listening to the Thoughtful Software Podcast. You can always check us out at skiplist.com. Thanks, and we'll talk to you again.